we'll get going. Firstly, a massive good morning and warm welcome from me, and thank you to so many of you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Rachel Anderson. I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs at Recco, and I'm going to be hosting and facilitating today's session. So I know some of you were able to join us back in November, and that's where we held a webinar to start gaining initial feedback in terms of developing our first standalone strategy document, which we published just before Christmas, and also our supporting forward work plan for the next 3 years. And both of these documents have since been published to industry for consultation, and we're currently within a consultation period up until the 5th of February. So the purpose of today, we're going to be discussing the draft forward work plan for 2025 to 2028, which we published about 2 weeks ago now on the 15th of January. And like I said, responses are due by industry up until the 5th of February. So today, alongside the consultation period and where you can submit more formal responses to the consultation, today's a really important platform for our engagement with you. You're going to be hearing from members of the executive team as they walk through our strategic roadmap and therefore our key priorities for the year ahead. But really importantly, we want to be hearing from you. We want your interactions. We want you to answer any questions or share any initial thoughts that you have on the forward work plan to us today. So we're going to be encouraging feedback in a couple of different ways today. We've got various Q&A sessions that are dotted through the agenda, so we can make sure that we pause and take any questions that come in. We're also going to be using some technology and launching some live polls today. So in a moment, we're going to be launching our first live poll just to make sure the technology is working. So Laura's going to support with that in just a moment. Whether you've had a chance to look at the forward work plan or not, please don't worry. Like I said, you're going to be hearing from all the executive team and walking through the main components of the forward work plan. But it will be really helpful for our speakers and to make sure that we're pitching at the right level. If we can just do a quick poll to see if you've yet had chance to look at our forward work plan. So Laura, would you be able to launch that for me, please? Thank you. So it should be popping up on your screen. Have you had a chance to read our forward work plan? Yes, no, or partially. So if you could submit your responses to that, that would be brilliant. I can see that there's someone who's got their hand up, Clive. Could we just bring Clive on microphone, please, so we can just see the question from Clive. Is that okay, Laura? Clive, are we able to speak to Clive and see what question he has? No, I think.
Okay, so Clive should be muted.
Clive, I think you've got your hand up. Have you got a question for us? Okay. Clive, we're not able to hear you at the moment. If potentially you could just type in your question within the Q&A function at the top panel, that'd be great. And we can just make sure that, that there's no initial issues today, just to cover off. But if we can go back onto the poll, I can see the results have started to come through. So we've had about 70 responses already, which is brilliant. It looks like the majority of our audience have partially or not read the forward work plan so far. So about 25% of people have read it, 36% have only partially read it. So I think that's really important insights, and just for our speakers today, if you can bear that in mind and pitch your presentations at that appropriate level based on the fact that a high proportion of people haven't yet read our forward work plan, but it's no problem at all. Okay, so that's our first poll, and it's great to see that the technology is working. If we just move on to some housekeeping points from me. First bit that I wanted to highlight is that please do keep cameras and microphones switched off during the speaker presentations. And that's because we're going to be recording today's session for the benefit of all of our colleagues that weren't able to join us today. The recording will be shared with you. It's also going to be going on the RECCO website and on our YouTube channel. We do want today to be as interactive as possible. So like I said at the beginning, we're going to be pausing through various positions within the agenda to take your questions. But you can also type your questions as you have them with the Q&A functionality. So you'll notice that the chat function has been switched off, but you can raise your questions within the Q&A functionality. The last bit from me is just to say that where you are raising questions, and we really do encourage you to raise your questions, and we want to hear from you today, please do keep your questions relevant, and that includes avoiding referencing any organisations, please. Okay, so that's our housekeeping. So who are our speakers today? If we could move on to the speaker slide. Thank you. So in terms of our speakers, I'm really pleased to say that I am joined by the rest of RECCO's executive team. We have Sid Cox as RECCO's Chief Executive, and he'll be starting things off for us in just a moment. We'll also hear from Elizabeth Lawler as our Chief Operating Officer. We'll hear from John Dixon as our Data of Strategy and Development. We'll hear from Pete Davies as our Director of Data Technology and Transformation. And last but not least, we'll also hear from Brian O'Shea as our Chief Finance and Commercial Officer. That's our speakers. So what can you expect in terms of the agenda today? So if we move on to the agenda slide, thank you. So we have purposely designed the agenda today to make sure that we walk you through the main components of the forward work plan and therefore RECCO's priorities for the year ahead. So the first main speaker presentation will be from Sid as our Chief Executive. And Sid is going to be walking through the aims and objectives of today. We also had some feedback at last year's webinar that some of the audience are new to RECCO or new to roles within the industry. So it would be helpful for future sessions that we include background information in terms of RECCO and why we were established. So Sid's going to provide some context in terms of RECCO before looking at our strategy, which we've been developing at the back end of last year, and how that's led to 3 new strategic aims, and then what that means in terms of our key priorities for the year ahead. So following Sid, we'll hear from Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's going to walk us through the REC service delivery and all of our plans in that area, including our continued evolution of the services and some of our in-flight work programmes in that area. We're going to hear from John. John Dixon's going to be talking all around energy theft and our initiatives in that space, but really importantly, also speaking around code reform and licensing and what that transition to a licensed REC code manager entity means for us, and really importantly, you as our stakeholders. Pete Davies is then going to be talking around some upcoming industry initiatives that are on our radar, such as consumer consents and also smart secure electricity system, which are subject to minded to positions currently with Ofgem and DESNZ, and I'll be giving some more information about that and our involvement in those programmes so far. Really importantly, this year we've also included our draft budget for consultation within the forward work plan. So Brian's going to be concluding the main speaker presentations today, talking us through the draft budget for 2025 to 2026. So at the end of the main speaker presentations, I'll move on to next steps and wrap up in terms of highlighting what some important dates for your diaries in terms of the consultation process that we're currently in. And then we'll do a wrap-up Q&A, and that's just to make sure that you have had the ability to raise your questions and provide any initial comments to the executive team. Really importantly, please, there's no need to take any notes today. Alongside the recording from today and the slide deck, we're going to be writing up any questions and responses over the next couple of days and sharing those directly to your inboxes, but also placing it on the RECCO website. So I can't see that there's any questions coming in so far. So I think without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Sid for our first speaker presentation. So over to you, Sid.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and welcome everyone to our Forward Work Plan seminar. The main aim and objective of today is to provide you, our stakeholders, with the ability to have a high-level overview of the Forward Work Plan which we published. Now, I know the majority of you haven't read it or only partially read it, so we will look to provide that overview to you. I'd also encourage you, we haven't had any questions in yet, but I would encourage you to put your questions in the chat or to raise your hands. And as Rachel mentioned, we will punctuate the presentations to answer those questions. So let's move on to speak a little about RECO and what RECO is all about. So RECO, put quite simply, is the corporate vehicle for ensuring the proper, effective and efficient ongoing management of the Retail Energy Code. And the Retail Energy Code sets out the governance, rules and operational requirements that retail energy market players must follow in fulfilling their roles in the retail energy market, including any license obligations. Now, set out in the license obligations of the gas and electricity suppliers in particular are three core REC requirements, objectives, which are to ensure that the REC operates and involves in a manner that facilitates achievement of the mission statement, ensure that customers' interests and data are protected in the operation of the REC, and to drive continual improvement in the operation of the REC, the central systems and communications infrastructure that it governs. You can see very clearly from the slide that the mission of RECO entirely aligns with those REC objectives set out in the license obligations. So we are here very much to support industry in fulfilling its obligations. You can see there that we seek to facilitate the efficient and effective running of the retail energy market, including its systems and processes, to promote innovation, competition, and deliver positive consumer outcomes. In terms of the timeline, RECO was established in 2019 to consolidate the pre-existing gas and electricity codes. And we've been in operation since September 2021. At the time, you will recall, there were major failures of energy supply companies, and also shortly thereafter, invasion of Ukraine, which led to massive spike in the retail energy market. So we were called upon almost immediately to be involved with, to lead and deliver multiple retail market initiatives. Those retail market initiatives included the new switching arrangements, and with that, the new gas inquiry services, the market stabilisation charge, and as recently as last year, the prepayment levelisation scheme. What this demonstrates to party is that over this time, we have demonstrated our ability to be a credible governance and delivery body, delivering at pace, on time and on budget. In terms of our operating model, our goal, as I mentioned, is to deliver excellent services, both in terms of code governance and also those core services that we provide to you, our stakeholders. Reco acts as an intelligent customer, procuring, managing, and transforming the core REC services, systems, and processes. In doing that, we strike the balance between addressing today's challenges while also addressing the needs and requirements of the future. As a not-for-profit organisation, we are very much cognizant that we are spending industry and ultimately the consumer's money. So it's very much incumbent upon us to ensure that all the services we deliver are secure, scalable, adaptable services which represent both efficiency and economy in delivery, ultimately delivering value for money. Integral to the operation and success of Reco is the executive team that you see before you. We provide essential support to our fully independent board of non-executive directors. We provide leadership, experience, and know-how in strategy and development, regulation, data and information management, transformation, and project management. We also provide core operational delivery expertise, commercial procurement, risk management, and financial management, and stakeholder and communication management for events like today. Currently, we provide 17 centralized services through 15 service providers. So you can see here our operating model is very much a learning one, where based upon our mission and strategy, we understand the requirements of the service that's required. We actively manage the contracts that we have and hold our supply partners to account. We use best practice in delivering and managing new projects and programs. We exercise value for money decision making. We collaborate not only with all of our service providers, but with other code bodies, with government and with the regulator. And ultimately, we seek the combined knowledge of all of our stakeholders to derive this virtual circle of a continuously improving and efficient operation. In focusing on what we do, we refer to our 5 C's, which are our the 5 core outcomes that we are seeking to achieve in the delivery of both our mission and also all of the changes that we make to our services. So first on that list you can see is consumer outcomes. We're looking for consumer benefit in what we do, to minimize consumer detriment and to maximize consumer benefit. We're also cognizant that we need to have a thriving retail market. So what we do has to have an eye on making sure that the market is accessible to existing players and new entrants, and to engender innovation and competition. We need to act as a catalyst for improvement. There are many challenges that we're facing, whether it's the challenge of decarbonisation and net zero, or whether they're the challenges of the cost of living crisis. So we need to constantly change and improve, not for change's sake, but to improve the retail market that everyone's operating in. The 4th element is cost. I referred earlier to delivering efficient and cost-effective services that deliver value for money. And ultimately, our final C is the climate, where we know that we can play a significant part in facilitating the journey towards decarbonisation and net zero. Rachel mentioned that we'd issued our strategy document last December, and in terms of the main focus of our strategy, if we can move on to the next slide, we have 3 core strategic aims which prioritize and inform us in our decision making and our business planning. The first and foremost is to perform the fundamental code management and service delivery function that we have. The second is to protect consumers' interests and also their data by making sure that our digital services are tailored and fit for purpose. And the final strategic aim is to ensure progress and innovation, whether that is continuous improvement or large scale projects to improve the market. So as a very high level overview of our forward work plan, you can see those themes, if I could move on to the next slide please, as our focus in the 25-26 business plan. Ultimately, as I've mentioned, we're here to deliver an excellent code management as well as excellent services. We're here to support and facilitate innovation in the retail market, and we have a role to evolve the capacity and capability of our team to ensure that we help you in fulfilling your obligations. Within the forward work plan, we set out 6 key programs of activity. The first is in relation to those services, which is the core requirement of what we're doing. And some of what my colleagues will talk about are some foundational change to those services that we're going to be looking to put in place. We continue to focus, as all of the market does, on delivering the market-wide half-hourly settlement program. We're very excited to have majority support of stakeholders to consider the launch of a new dedicated energy theft unit. Many of you will know that we are currently in the process of applying for our license and code reform, so we've got to be on top of that. And there are 2 particularly new market-wide initiatives: consumer consents and the smart secure electricity system, where we have been indicated by Ofgem and DESNZ as a potential leading delivery partner. So before I hand over to my colleagues who'll go into some more detail about what we'd like to do, I'd like to take a few moments to recognise and pay tribute to Chris Anastasi, who is on the call. Chris, as many of you will know, is the chair of RECO and is coming to the end of his 6-year term. So Chris, I know this isn't what you wanted, but on behalf of everyone at RECO, industry and all stakeholders, I'd like to thank you for the dedication, the contribution and the support you have provided in establishing RECO and setting us on the firm foundation that we're on to be a credible governance and delivery body for the REC. So if you all wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask you to raise a virtual round of applause for Chris Anastasi. Thank you, Chris. So having now made Chris blush, again, in the background, I'd like to hand over to Elizabeth, who's going to speak about Reco services and Reco evolution. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Sid. Good morning, everyone. I think we have been having some trouble with the sound this morning, although I just saw that lots of people did respond and with the round of applause. Can I just do a quick check to make sure people can hear me before we get started? Yeah, okay. Grand, thank you very much. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Lawler. I am Reco's Chief Operating Officer. My role at Reco, or my objective, is to ensure that the REC services, as defined in the code, meet your requirements now and into the future. And the operations team that we have at Reco, led by Mark Loveday, is structured in a way that means each of our REC services have a dedicated service manager in place. And the role of those service managers is to provide the expert focus and a partnership approach to ensure that our service providers meet their code and contractual obligations, essentially delivering the services that you need to allow you to carry out your day-to-day activities under the REC. Right now, the team is managing a review of all of the service provider KPIs to check that those performance indicators remain fit for purpose, and also delivering the performance improvement plans that we identified last year and carrying into this year in response to the feedback that you've given to us through our events like the REC Roadshows and customer satisfaction surveys. And just before I go on, I'm going to be talking a lot about the code manager, our other REC service providers and the Reco team. There's an awful lot of people that sit behind the scenes doing the hard work day in, day out. And I'd just like to give my thanks to all of those people that make these things happen for us. In the slides that I'm going to talk to, I'm going to focus on some of the key right now activities that we're carrying out, and then the longer term evolution pieces that we're delivering. And to my earlier point, it's exactly that reason, that purpose that we have to make sure that we're delivering what you need now, but also that we've got that longer term view, that we're thinking ahead and making sure that the services are able to deliver into the future. Sorry, Helen, just back to the previous slide for me. That's grand, thank you. Okay. So for most of you, the code manager is your primary interface with the REC. Most of the engagement is channeled through the REC service provider, whether that's logging a ticket on the service desk, whether you are looking using our digital tool, our AI tool, Erin, to ask a question about the REC schedules, whether you are having a meeting with your OAM, or looking up your performance on the performance assurance dashboards. It's all channeled through the code manager services. And therefore, it's absolutely essential that those services are supported by a knowledgeable team, and also that the tools that you use are easy to access and work for you. This year, we've been focusing on the cornerstones of the code manager service provider contracts. So change management, which I'll talk about, performance assurance, and also those digital tools. We've worked really hard with the code manager this year, and they've worked incredibly hard themselves to carry out a review of the change process. It's really important that you have confidence in the rigor and quality of the assessment and analysis of any of the REC change proposals as they work their way through the process, and also that that process is efficient and that change moves through at an appropriate speed. So with the work that we've done this year, we've invested significantly in the teams within the code manager, within the change teams and the operational account managers. And we've actually been able to reduce the amount of time that it takes for a change to progress through the REC from 238 to 175 days. So a significant focus on making sure that the change process is fit for purpose, that it's able to support industry change, to prioritise those enhancements, improvements, changes to the regulations that are going to have the greatest impact on you as industry participants and consumers. And that's where our focus will stay for this year. If we move on now to the next slide, thank you. So it is of course necessary that we monitor compliance with the REC, that we mitigate risk, that we ensure best practice is delivered. But also we have to ensure that that performance assurance framework is proportionate to the level of retail risk that we're assessing. The performance assurance regime must be delivered by an expert team with a deep understanding of market issues. And we need to be able to demonstrate that whatever techniques we're applying or areas of risk mitigation that we're looking at and managing, that that's offering value for money to industry. This year, the focus of the assurance team has been very much on improving communication and engagement. We received feedback last year that parties wanted the opportunity to talk more directly with the performance assurance team and to have a greater level of understanding in the operation of the PAF and the framework that they're subject to. So we ran a trial of what we call the RPA check-ins to allow that direct communication and encourage that direct communication between yourselves and the RPA team. And following really positive feedback, we're now going to roll that out as an enduring function within the service. Next year, continuing on that theme, the team will also focus on more targeted market entry and assurance training, and also to look again at the way that we manage and mitigate retail risk. Thanks. So if the code manager is your primary interface with the REC, it's absolutely essential that the quality of the tools that they provide to you and that you use are easy to access and easy to use. The REC portal should be your one-stop shop for being able to access all of the services and information that you need to be able to meet your REC obligations. And so in the digital space this year, there's been a significant focus on user experience, on the digital REC and the REC portal. And hopefully you will have seen some of the benefits of that. You'll have been able to see firsthand the changes that we've implemented. So on the REC portal, a greatly simplified homepage, much easier to navigate, easier now to get through to the digital REC. That should also be easier to navigate for you and find information, and things like more targeted news items. It's a work in progress. There are some changes that we're continuing to make, and we welcome any feedback you have on the changes that we've made so far. So whilst we've been focusing on those short-term kind of quick wins, if you like, in user experience, we've also been assessing the options for the digital services in the longer term. You've consistently, through your feedback through the customer satisfaction surveys to us, identified the REC portal and the digital REC as the lowest scoring elements of the Code Manager service. And as those contracts come up, or the contracts expire in August of next year, so last year we launched a competitive procurement process to introduce a new suite of digital tools to address those performance issues that you've identified. That project is now in flight. We're in an active procurement process at the moment, looking to award a contract in the coming months. We've allowed plenty of time for this procurement. We want to make sure that there's plenty of opportunity for you as the users of the tools to engage through the design, the development, and absolutely the testing of the new system. We're also building into our deployment phase a soft launch period so we can make sure that the new digital tools are going to be delivering exactly what you need at the point of go live in September of 2026. That's the digital services part of the Code Manager Service Provider Solutions. This coming year, we'll also be reviewing all of the other elements of the Code Manager Service Providers contracts to inform our future service approach, to make sure that the services that we deliver continue to meet your evolving needs. And John Dixon's going to speak in a little while about code reform and the impact of that on RECO and on our service providers. And as I said at the outset, we must make sure that our services are fit to deliver, and we need to understand what the impact of a Code Manager license will be on RECO, and therefore what we need to establish through those contracts. So that's the work that we'll be carrying out in the first half of this year, refining our view on the future of the other elements of the Code Manager contracts. Thank you, Helen. So many of you will be aware that last year we supported Ofgem in its review of the CRS as it considered the options of transferring the delivery of the arrangements from the DCC to RECO. In December of last year, Ofgem published its decision, and that was that DCC should retain the responsibility for the delivery of the CRS. Naturally, we were disappointed with that outcome. We considered that there was a real opportunity to streamline the governance, to introduce efficiencies, and we submitted a business case to Ofgem that identified a number of benefits that we thought we would be able to deliver to industry and ultimately consumers if that transfer took place. Nonetheless, despite the outcome, as you would expect, we remain fully committed to working with DCC to drive to improvements to deliver those benefits where we can within the scope of the current arrangements. And Brian will detail to you later, the analysis that we've conducted will result in a significant cost reduction in the costs of the CSS to industry. In its decision letter, Ofgem did identify that there are improvements that can be made in the existing delivery and existing service, and it specifically said that it supports a review of the CRS governance within the REC and the overall operating model. And so we're working closely with DCC now and with Ofgem to develop a plan that will be in place by the end of March of this year to roll out over next year to realise where we can those benefits that we identified. And we've identified with DCC 5 key areas that we're going to focus our attention for those improvements. And that's address data quality, change management, incident management, communication with industry, and reporting. And so we'll be carrying out a review alongside DCC to look at changes we can make to the REC to help to implement these improvements and these enhancements. And it's worth saying that whilst we carry out that review, we'll look at anything within the REC that we know is a redundant obligation or no longer required now that we've got this greater level of understanding of how the CRS is operated. So the gas and electricity inquiry services, often shortened to the inquiry services, or the GES and the EES, are business critical services for many of you, and ensuring that they're accessible and available is our primary focus. To support that, last year we completed a successful re-platforming of the GES, and that resulted in around £1 million cost saving to industry. And we've also delivered in this last year a record number of service enhancements in the EES contract. You've been incredibly generous sharing your feedback with us on the inquiry services through our REC roadshows, customer survey satisfaction surveys, and you've given us a really clear message. So what you've told us is that the services broadly meet your core requirements today. There's been a significant investment, particularly in the EES for MHHS. We have a lot of acronyms, don't we, for MHHS, that we need to make sure we maximise return on. The general level of change across industry means that we really need to be really mindful of the impact of any further change, of any significant, especially technology programs, and we need to prioritise our work accordingly. But there is an appetite for incremental change and enhancements within the current service. So those are the parameters that we're working within. And that's the position that we're taking into our consideration of what we do next with the inquiry services. And the reason that's pertinent is that the initial term of the current contract of the inquiry services expires in the summer of this year. We have an automatic right to give a 2-year extension to that initial term. But taking into account all of your feedback, we're also exploring with the incumbent service providers the opportunity to offer a longer term contract extension. So we've given both of those service providers an opportunity to demonstrate to us the value and the benefit of a longer term extension, and we'll be assessing those proposals over the coming months, and we'll assess those with the objective essentially to ensure that those services are fit for the future but at the right price. Sid mentioned in his introduction the MHHS programme, a major cross-code industry-wide programme drawing significant time, effort and focus resources from many of you. RECO is a programme participant. We're defined in the code as a programme participant, and we also have a critical role to play within the programme. So we're delivering the changes to the electricity inquiry service to make sure that they support the new arrangements. We're drafting the regulatory changes required to the REC to make sure the governance is there. And we're also supporting and providing a robust qualification scheme to make sure that REC parties can operate under those new arrangements. And in fact, I think that the qualification assessment document portal went live recently, and the RPA is currently reviewing the first of those submissions. We've got an extremely experienced team headed by John Hawkins that are leading our element of the MHHS programme, and they've ensured that we've remained on track with all of our RECO deliverables and will continue to do so as the programme evolves over the next year or so. We're going to move on to questions in just a moment. Before I do, I just wanted to note to you that for all of the programmes that I've spoken about and all of the pieces of work, we have got stakeholder advisory forums and groups established. So there's a Code Manager Evolution Project stakeholder advisory group, the same for the Gas and Electricity Inquiry Services Evolution Project. We will be using a stakeholder advisory forum to develop the changes to the CRS improvement plan. And we will also be looking for volunteers to come and support us in the design and testing of the new digital services. So if there's anything that I've spoken about today that's of a particular interest to you and you'd like to get involved in, then please drop us a note, go through the info at Retail Energy Code mailbox, and we can make sure you have access to that information. And if you haven't signed up already, we'd love to see you at our REC MHHS training day that's taking place on the 13th of February. So I just wanted to do a little plug to make sure that, you know, if there's anything today that we've spoken about, you'd like more information, whether you're at the kind of the entry level or the expert level, you're very welcome to join and participate in those sessions. Thank you.
Okay, so it's our first pause for any questions. So does anyone have any questions for Elizabeth or Sid, or anything that you've heard so far? I can't see any that has come in initially via the Q&A function. Hopefully you can all see that there is a Q&A function where you can type in your questions. Laura did post a comment about 15 minutes ago just to highlight where you should be writing your questions. Alternatively, if you'd rather directly interact with us, just raise the hand and we can bring you on microphone. So just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to raise any questions. Okay. I'll tell you what we can do then. If there's no questions at the moment, why don't we launch our first couple of polls, if that would be helpful, and that might generate some questions coming off the back of that. So you should see some questions popping up on your screen now. On a scale of 1 to 4, how much do you agree with our plan priorities for delivering service excellence, which Elizabeth just outlined? 4 being strongly agree. So if you could please start responding there, that would be fantastic. I can see the results are coming in. We've had about 35 responses, very positive. The majority either agreeing or strongly agreeing. We've had, I think, 1 person so far disagreeing. I think there's an opportunity to add your comment to this poll. So please, if there is anything that you do disagree with, please, as much feedback that you can share with us would be really helpful. And we're more than happy to take anything offline as well if we can provide you with any information or there's anything else that you'd like us to be focusing on. So Laura has also launched a word cloud to ask for any comments, so feel free to type in any comments. I'm not sure how it will be presented in this, but it'll be useful in terms of the quality of comments that we can take offline anyway. So feel free to share any comments and we'll take a look at those after the session and of course follow up with you if there's anything that we could do to answer your questions. So we've had challenging. See, this is the issue with word clouds and what challenging means in regard to this comment. But yes, if there's
it's
anything
a challenging
else,
work plan. We know we've got a lot, and I'm going to take it in that spirit rather. But if it's anything else intended, then please do share in the chat or reach out to us afterward.
Okay, brilliant. There is one more question. If there is anything additional you would like to see included in the plan. So you've heard Elizabeth talk all around our core services. Is there anything that's missing? Anything that you'd like us to focus on? This is a good opportunity to share some initial priorities from your perspective, and we'll take this offline and review all these. So again, these polls will stay open for the duration of the webinar, and I hope so. If anything springs to mind, if there's any particular bugbear in any of our services, please do share any feedback within the poll. That'd be brilliant. Okay, so we'll keep those ones open. I have a feeling there was a question that came in. Oh, we've had a couple of questions. First of all, we've had a question from Chris Berry regarding being a TPI. So I represent a TPI and we use the inquiry services a lot for customer meter information. One thing I would like to ask is with regards to data accuracy, we see suppliers changing dates such as date of energization incorrectly. Can this be monitored or policed? It is very annoying to see the incorrect dates. So Elizabeth, around data accuracy.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for your question, Chris. I'll immediately say that I'm not going to be able to answer at an expert level in this way. If there are obligations within the REC that parties are meant to be complying with and they're not complying with, then there is a matter for REC performance assurance, and we'll take a specific action away to see if this is something that's being actively monitored at the moment. So certainly at a basic principle, then we do have a performance assurance framework that monitors compliance with the REC. It's not a sort of a tick box exercise, so they don't go through compliance with every single obligation. It's focused primarily on retail risk, and the higher risk areas are where we focus time and effort. But if there is something that's happening that is obviously having an impact on your business, and that's something that we need to take a look at. So I think the best response I can say is I don't have the detailed answer for you. We'll take it away and we'll come back to you. Rachel, we'll have Chris's contact details through the registration form, presumably.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And I can see a question's just come in from Simon at Smith as well around engaging with us around data for the central addressing service. I think that's a direct one-to-one query. So Simon, please be reassured that we'll follow up with you offline and so you can speak to us around your specific needs there. We do have a question from Bradley Baker from DCC, Elizabeth. It's just asking to repeat the 5 areas for improvement. So those pillars that you spoke around in terms of the CRS, if you could just repeat those.
That's fine. Morning, Bradley. I see that you're from DCC. I will say that these 5 areas have absolutely been jointly developed, and the plan developed with your colleagues in the CRS team. But the 5 areas are address data quality improvement, change management, incident management, communication with industry, and reporting. And if you would like any more information, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with the project team or share the outline plan that we've developed at the moment.
Okay, those were our 3 questions that have come in so far. So Chris, Bradley and Simon, I hope we've been able to answer your questions. Simon, I know yours is a bespoke query, so like I said, we'll be in touch following the webinar. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick look at the poll to see if there's anything worth sharing that we haven't already. I think just in terms of the initial question, in terms of plan priorities for delivering service excellence, again, it's finished looking really, really positive. The majority of 57 responses was strongly agreeing with the service, delivering service excellence priorities that you outlined, Elizabeth, which is really, really positive.
Yeah.
We haven't had too many additional responses, in fact, no additional responses in terms of the word clouds. But like I said, if anything pops up in anyone's head as we go through the remaining of the agenda, please do share your comments on those.
Rachel, I presume that the polls are anonymous, but obviously for the two people that don't feel that we're prioritising and focusing on the right areas in the plan, it would be really helpful to have a discussion around that and understand who you are and what those concerns might be. If you're happy, not necessarily now on the call, but again, just to drop us a note so we can reach out to you. I'd really like to have that conversation because we want to be getting it right. So if you're happy to share your details, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, so John, I think we're going to be passing over to you now. If you could come on camera and microphone, and you're going to be talking through energy theft and licensing.
Morning all. As indicated, I'm John Dixon. I look after strategy and development for RECCO. And today that's included some of the kind of discovery projects around what we as an industry can do to tackle energy theft, and to the extent they bear fruit, they then get operationalized and become services that would come under a different team. So I'll kind of talk through some of the phases that some of the things we're working on are through. We'll move on to the next slide, please. Some of you have been familiar with this slide already because we've had a program of work looking at energy theft for a period of time now. Not just because it's a large-scale financial problem for the industry. Our latest figures of that, it costs us around £750 million a year, and I think that's a prudent estimate when you compare it to the volumes of kind of non-technical losses on both the gas and electricity systems. That value does fluctuate every time we try to peg it to the Ofgem default tariff cap. So if you compare it to some of the values we put out previously, it does look lower, but that's, as I say, because of those changes in the indexing rather than anything else. But it's a large scale problem, not just financially, but obviously because of the impacts on health and safety as well. So we're keen to continue tackling this and do everything we can to assist the industry in preventing it as far as practicable. We inherited a number of services from the legacy codes in terms of the operation of the energy theft tip-off service, which continues to be operated on our behalf by Crime Stoppers, and also around the theft detection incentive scheme. But what we've been trying to do is take a more whole of system approach, learning lessons from other fraud and theft prevention strategies in other industries to try and create what's referred to earlier as a virtuous circle, and this is another one in terms of theft prevention and resolution. So what we're primarily interested in is trying to prevent theft from happening in the first place. That's obviously the best outcome for everybody, and so we continue to fund the Stay Energy Safe campaign. That's operated again in conjunction with Crime Stoppers to try and raise awareness amongst consumers, the general public, about the dangers of tampering with meters, bypassing meters, etc. So that will continue to be a key plank of our strategy going forward. We've also been looking at the whether we can improve the efficacy of the incentives around all of this. So I touched upon the theft detection incentive scheme earlier. We have current change with Ofgem for decision, which would change the emphasis of that scheme from simply rewarding the outcome of an investigation, so that there's a payment on confirmation of theft at a given site, to recognising that actually in a lot of cases there's a lot of work that goes into investigations that don't end up passing that evidential threshold, and we want to create the right incentives for those behaviours, if you like, to encourage suppliers to undertake those investigative activities. So what R173 is about rewarding the activity rather than the kind of happenstance of what's found. And moving through all of that, we recognise that we have a very fragmented industry, not just in the kind of competitive retail market where customers are changing frequently, but different roles and responsibilities between suppliers, networks, etc. as well. And I think there's a real problem in terms of sharing data and being able to pool those data sets and draw some insights and analysis from it. So we've been working on potential solutions to that. We've had a project running for a period of time to gather data from those suppliers are willing to share data with us to see if we can identify trends within it, potential red flags in it that could indicate that there are situations requiring further investigation, etc. And that will all hopefully improve your ability to discharge your license obligations to prevent, detect, and investigate theft, etc. But fundamentally, we also recognise that the industry, any industry party, is quite limited in their powers and their ability to tackle certain types of theft, and not least where you've got organised criminal activity or potentially facilitators going door to door offering meter bypasses and tampers, etc. So we've listened to those pieces of feedback from previous workshops we've held on theft and what really would benefit the industry in being able to tackle this problem. And we've recently issued a business case on a proposal to work in partnership with the City of London Police to tackle this and set up a dedicated energy theft unit. We chose the City of London Police on the basis that they are the national lead force for all financial crimes and fraud prevention, etc. So the name can be a bit misleading. They do have a nationwide remit, and we're hoping we can get that service up and running during the course of 2025. We've raised the change proposals, and they're currently going through the process to raise those. And we've indicated in our forward work plan that we'd like to get that service up and running towards the back end of this year, and that's a feature of our proposed budget for the coming financial year. So hopefully that will help close that loop, create that virtuous circle that I touched upon earlier. And I guess fundamentally, apart from providing a route through to escalation and potential prosecution for those genuine criminal elements, what we're going to do is make sure that there's an increased level of deterrent as well. At the minute, too many people see this as either being a victimless crime or something which simply has a lower risk of being detected and prosecuted, and addressing that will help. But we're also conscious that we don't want the industry to be tarnished with lots of bad publicity, etc., and going after the wrong types of consumer, if you like, for this. So we're also proposing to set up a referral assessment service that will in part be there to ensure that the quality of the leads that are being passed through to the energy theft unit are sufficient for them to act upon and make sure we're getting the best possible value for money out of that proposed police partnership, but also to act as a triage to make sure that it's essentially the right types of cases that are being referred onward. So as I say, the outline business case for that was published in the autumn last November. So that goes into a lot more detail on this, and we've touched upon it in the forward work plan as well. So if there are any further questions on that, I'm more than happy to pick them up. But we are continuing to engage with stakeholders both through the change process, and as I say, this will be discussed at the change panel next week, and also through dedicated theft stakeholder fora, such as the Theft Issues Group, which we attended first thing this morning. I think I'll move on from there, if I could. So Elizabeth touched upon code reform and as being the licensed code manager and what that means for us as an organisation. I think the current timeline that Ofgem are working to is to issue the first tranche of licenses in the middle of 2026. I think that timetable is very much dependent on the pace of secondary legislation going through, etc. So we don't have a firm date for that as yet, but we do have some working assumptions as to when we'll need to be prepared for all that. We're literally just in the early stages of going through that process already, insofar as we yesterday submitted confirmation of our intention to be that licensee. Both RECCO in respect of the REC and Elexon in respect of the BSE have been identified as being in that first tranche of licensees, with other codes to follow as and when any consolidation to those codes has been carried out. So those two first codes have been done on a non-competitive basis. So hopefully that provides a great degree of certainty to our parties, and make sure that the code reform process is not of itself disruptive to ongoing work. As Elizabeth touched upon, there will inevitably be some changes to the way we operate as a result of being a licensee and potentially having new regulatory requirements. But as far as but by and large, the code reform proposals around how the codes should adopt the code manager model have already been incorporated into the REC. We were lucky insofar as the REC was developed alongside the early thinking on the code reform proposals and taken by Ofgem and DESNZ. So an awful lot of the thinking around the changes to the codes is already part and parcel of our model. So for instance, we've always been a proactive and independent code manager rather than a kind of an administrator dependent on decisions taken by an industry-led panel. I appreciate that that's not always popular with some parties, and the key thing that we'll need to adopt going forward is to make sure that we replace the existing panels, as indicated by Ofgem, with a stakeholder advisory forum that is genuinely representative of industry views and provides meaningful insights into the decision-making process. So that will be a key part of what we need to establish over the next 12, 18 months or so. It's important that we learn the lessons of previous stakeholder engagement and some of the problems we've had in getting representation from smaller parties or from consumer representatives or third sector organisations, etc. So again, part and parcel of setting up the REC was to try and move away from physical face-to-face meetings in work groups for all the development of these things and try and embrace much more agile working, allow remote access as far as possible, and try and engage with those smaller parties and those with fewer resources on a more proactive basis rather than simply establishing a meeting and hoping people turn up, etc. Elizabeth touched upon the review of our existing KPIs, etc. I think part and parcel of us being a licensee will be that we as RECCO will become much more directly accountable for the delivery of those services. Some things will inevitably need to be reported into Ofgem, but what we don't want to do is just duplicate all the reporting we have. So again, we hope to integrate all of those reporting reviews and revisions with what we're already doing as part and parcel of performance assurance. In terms of the wider code reform, as I say, there'll be some requirements for the other codes to consolidate. We are working with other code bodies to identify where lessons can be learned from the existing operation of REC and see going through the process, etc. And we're keen to make sure that the cross-code governance is more effective than it has been in the past. We've had a focus on making sure we speak to each other more actively when a new change is raised, for instance, and try to identify any consequential impacts on those other codes, and that will continue to be a strong feature of code reform going forward. But more than that, governance is not just about change, it's also about making sure that the codes operate on a day-to-day basis much more effectively. So again, we're aiming to integrate all of the other code bodies into a whole of system approach to performance assurance, for instance. One of the things we will need to speak to parties about potentially in the near term, and certainly when we have future webinars like this regarding our forward work plan, is our reaction and acceptance of any strategic direction statement. So part and parcel of the code reform will be an ability for Ofgem to issue a direction to the code bodies to undertake certain changes that facilitate the kind of transformational, wide transformational change to the industry. So all predicated on trying to move us towards a net zero industry. We are expecting a consultation from Ofgem on that very shortly, potentially by the end of this week. That will take a number of months to obviously be consulted upon and then gather responses and then provide the final strategic direction statement. Ofgem have indicated that this first one will be a kind of a trial run insofar as we don't yet have the licenses binding us to deliver those directions, and it will also span the period before we get the license. So we're expecting this first time frame to deliver any changes to be around about 2 years, whereas in future it might be an annual event. The good news from our point of view is we're not expecting any surprises with that strategic direction statement. The conversations we've had suggest that the areas Ofgem wants us to focus on are already very much part of our thinking, already baked into the forward work plan. Some of those Pete will touch upon in a moment. So again, from a retail energy code perspective, we're not expecting any surprises from that strategic direction statement, and therefore no new requirements that you as REC parties will need to adopt to. But going forward, it will be something that we do need to be much more fleet of foot and perhaps respond dynamically to any reprioritisation, etc. I think that's all I was going to touch upon this morning, conscious that there's an awful lot of material already out there around code reform, etc. So more than happy to spend the time in answering any questions.
Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any questions that have come in at the moment, John. But if we just give everyone a minute or so just to type in any questions or raise your hand, please do so. Love to hear from you. Anything that we can provide any more information on. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Doesn't look like there's any questions at the moment, John, but we do have various different Q&A sessions coming up in the agenda as well. So if we could bring on Pete. Pete, I think you're going to be speaking about the next agenda item.
I am. Good morning, everyone. First of all, can everyone hear me? So quick thumbs up. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, morning, I'm Pete. I'm the Director of Data Transformation and Technology at RECO, and I'm going to talk through two conditional programs. So, by conditional, they are minded to positions from Ofgem and DESNZ, and those two programs are consumer consent and smart secure energy systems, specifically the tariff interoperability side, not anything around ESAs or enduring governance. Both of these projects do have deeper business cases available on the RECO website should you want to read them. I'll be very clear, they're very much more around the management case of how RECO would do this if we're selected. It doesn't replace any work by Ofgem or DESNZ on economic or strategic cases. So should you want more information, you can look at those. But I will now give an overview of those two programs. So Helen, if we could go to the first one, please. So keeping in mind that some of you haven't read the forward work plan, I'll start with some basics. So the consumer consent program driven by Ofgem is really this idea that a centralized mechanism for consumer consent could be implemented across energy. And that's very akin to open banking. So those of you familiar with open banking and the standardized way of consumers providing consent to access to data is something that we'd be looking to replicate within energy. Now, this is good for industry and energy because one, it would start to standardize how we gather consent, and we've all been through those experiences in programs where bespoke things need to be set up or a lot of additional work needs to be done or barriers come. This would ultimately help reduce those barriers. The second thing is from the consumer's perspective, and particularly from consumer groups, research has indicated that the inconsistency in how consent is gathered creates a barrier to trust, to engagement from consumers, and ultimately this program would start to standardize that and therefore aim to or ultimately increase trust. Now that's more on the what, so those of you who weren't familiar with it. Maybe a question would be why RECO? Well, Sid introduced RECO and explained what one of our core objectives is, and that's to protect consumer data. And this is a major part of that. The other thing is we've spent the last couple of years off the back of the original Catapult Energy Digitalisation Task Force, engaging with industry, with Ofgem, with DESNZ around how this could potentially operate. So we've built up a bank of experience of how this could be done should we be selected. Moving on to the when. So when is the target date for this implementation? If we look at Ofgem's consultation, that is planned to be September 2026, or when market half-hourly settlement goes live, depending on how you interpret things. We recognise that industry has a lot going on, and when we come to the next project, you'll see that has the similar timelines. So we're engaging with Ofgem, with industry around what is the most appropriate way to do that, and we'll be supporting Ofgem coming up with a more appropriate timeline. So I've covered off the what, the when, and the why. Now a little bit more about the how, and you're probably thinking what happens next. So should we be selected as the minded to position or confirmed as the minded to position, the initial focus will be around design. We see the design phase being consultation led, broadly industry led, and through that we would see engagement with a multitude of industry parties, be that existing retailers, new data providers, consumer bodies, to come up with the most appropriate solution. And there's a number of options and ideas that we've currently got, but we can't really progress those any further without having that formal engagement. And we see the rep change process and a number of working groups as a way to achieve that. The next bit is that some of you might be aware that there are other industry programs, so the data sharing infrastructure, otherwise known as the DSI, which has NISA as the minded to position, or the Flexibility Market Asset Register, FMAR. Those two initiatives have a very tight alignment with consumer consent. So we're engaged with those organisations, should we be selected, as to how best we can reuse each other's technology choices, governance choices, ultimately with the aim of trying to keep the costs down to you and therefore the consumers. So that's consumer consent at a reasonably high level. Again, I said there's a paper out there with more detail should you wish to read that, and I welcome any questions at the end of this section. Moving on to smart secure energy system, electricity system, tariff interoperability. This is very much around standardizing and making tariffs available in a common format so that flexibility products or energy efficiency products can be utilized by consumers. And that's the primary driver for those of you who know about the SSES, or the Smart Secure Electricity Systems Programme. This is good, obviously, for consumers in the sense that it will start to standardize how they can access some of these services and enable industry players to come up with new product services that were potentially previously a barrier to. It also fits reasonably well with RECO in the sense that the REC is the Retail Energy Code, and this and tariffs and consumers are a mainstay of what the REC is there to help support. So we see a nice alignment with the REC and RECO, and that's supported by DESNZ's minded to position. Moving on to the when, I spoke about this being a very similar timeline to consumer consent. Again, it's listed as around September 2026, or potentially when market half-hourly settlement goes live. There's definitely some positives in being ready in and around market half-hourly settlement, because if the balancing mechanisms match, the tariff availability is there, consents are potentially there, then theoretically the mainstays and the enabling factors of the energy system would be broadly in place for this future flexible market and the delivery of net zero. However, that's a lot to ask, and again, we're engaged with DESNZ and Ofgem to influence and understand what is the most and best appropriate timescale for this to be delivered in. Moving on to the how, this is very much focused more around standards of a tariff, less around systems, whereas consumer consent does have a major systems aspect. This is around standardizing that tariffs, and energy retailers would ultimately need to develop APIs or application programming interfaces to provide that tariff data in that format. Currently, we're engaged with DESNZ, and some of you in this call are hopefully members of the Tariff Interoperability Working Group, which is currently engaging and understanding what policy decisions to make around that. Once the REC, or not once, if the REC is confirmed as the minded to position, then we will take over that process and engage deeper with industry on much more technical prescriptive aspects of the data specification. And that leads us into that 25-26 focus, developing the technical frameworks, continuing to conduct stakeholder engagement. Ultimately, we would like to pilot and test some of these things for those organisations that are ready to. And the final bit here is that for this to be a success with consumers, for this to get to the point where actually people are using the service, we are getting the flexibility within the system that we need, there needs to be a level of performance assurance. And this has been proven in open banking, where things like response rates, availability of data, accuracy of data. When that wasn't there, actually consumers' trust failed in that. So we see a role of performance assurance in that, in the sense that we need to assure the availability, accuracy, etc. of the data moving between parties. So that concludes the two programs. I just reiterate, these are both conditional, so they're minded to positions from Ofgem and DESNZ. We're doing preparatory work at this point in time, and so we're making sure that we're ready should we be selected, but we are not spending any of that project money detailed in the budget that Brian will talk through later without confirmation from Ofgem and DESNZ of our minded to position.
Okay, so time for some questions, and I'm actually going to bring John Dixon back onto the screen as well, because whilst you were talking, Pete, we had a couple of really good questions in terms of the SDS and around code reform. So John, are you able to come back on camera for us, please? That'd be brilliant. Okay.
I am. I've seen Kirsty's question, so you've saved me having to type it, although it means I don't have the thinking time. I was hoping I would have to type one. I think the thrust of Kirsty's question was the extent to which will be dependent on cross-code collaboration to discharge the strategic direction statements. And I think the honest answer is that we don't yet know until we see the published versions of those strategic direction statements. Ofgem's been having bilateral discussions with each of the code bodies, and I'm certainly expecting that each of the codes will receive a direction statement, or at least we'll have a something targeted towards them in the upcoming consultation. Some of those directed changes are likely to be very code specific and not necessarily have those kind of cross-code implications. Others will be generic and required to be picked up by all of the codes, particularly in respect of code reform. The tricky bit will be the ones that are not immediately obvious as having those consequential impacts. And as I touched upon earlier, I think once we've seen those directions, the requirement from us will be to produce a delivery plan in terms of how we're going to discharge those directions and share that with Ofgem. And I think that's the point at which we'll need to have some open and frank discussions with not just other code bodies, but stakeholders, because they may, to my mind, need to be a degree of compromise if there are consequential impacts on other codes, but everybody kind of doing things independently might result in kind of suboptimal outcomes. So I think that's where we'll all have to up our game, I think, in terms of the level of cross-code collaboration we already have, but the extent to which we consult with stakeholders on those impacts if we have to change any existing plans. I think this time around, the strategic direction statements, I'm relatively comfortable they'll be more a reflection of what's already in train, and as I say, hopefully not being naive, not expecting any nasty surprises in there. But going forward, I think it'd be appropriate that as part of the code reform, we think about how we'll deal with those kind of challenges in future, and perhaps codify those kind of requirements so that we can all submit a delivery plan to Ofgem that's had that degree of cross-code discussion, collaboration, and the plans all joined up. It won't do anybody any good if we all submit plans that are mutually contradictory. So yeah, it's a work in progress. I think it's fair to say, but as I say, it's something that's already in train through those cross-code discussions across all the code bodies. Hope that answers the question, Kirsty, but follow up if I've misunderstood the question.
Yeah, I think I saw a thumbs up. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you.
We did have another question, John. It was to check understanding whether RECO would have 2 years to implement the first SDS by Ofgem before we become a licensee.
Again, we'll have to wait and see what's in the consultation that's due soon. We haven't seen the exact text of that direction, but the conversations we've had indicate that the first direction statements are likely to span this transitional period before we become licensees. So I wouldn't, for instance, expect this to be something that we have to deliver by the end of the 25-26 financial year. The first one is likely to be a longer period, whether it be 18 months or 2 years. We don't yet know, but I think Ofgem are very cognizant of the fact that all of the code bodies will have already set out their budgets and forward work plans for 25, 26, and these are coming a little bit late in the day to kind of incorporate for delivery this financial year. So as I say, I think this first one will be for a longer period, but going forward, we might end up in a kind of an annual cadence.
Okay, thank you, John. Pete, I don't think there's any questions currently for you. Please, anyone, if you've got any questions or would like to know any more information around consumer consent or SSES, there is still time to ask your questions. What we're going to do now, Pete, that you had a couple of poll questions you wanted to get some answers to. So shall we launch those, and it might inspire some questions as well. So everyone, the first question should be popped up on your screen. What do you consider the most important aspect in project delivery in achieving a successful consumer consent service that has high user engagement and trust? So this is a word cloud. So any initial thoughts from anyone is welcome. Pete, anything that you'd like to see in this at all? Anything you want to talk about?
So we did contemplate different questions to ask here, including things like how well do you think it aligns with the REC, etc. But the reality was that's the space of Ofgem and DESDES to decide for the respective projects. Therefore, thought it'd be very helpful to get your feedback on what do you think matters during that project delivery. So I can see examples of their testing that really helps us focus on things like that, data sharing, the secureness of it. That's great to see that at the top. So this sort of information will just help us in the preparation at this point, and we can build that into any sort of our plans, etc. And wow, I can see a lot of text now, and it's getting smaller and smaller on my screen. And I lost my glasses about 2 months ago, and I'm really resentful to go back to Specsavers and get a new pair. So I'm struggling to read them. Although I can see secure is at the centre, which I would not disagree with. I'd probably say it is the centre.
Yeah, other things like engagement strategy, effective communications, consumer analysis is coming up. Simplicity a couple of times, clarity. So everyone, the word cloud is still going to remain open. I think, Laura, if you could publish the next question, it was in regards to the SSES programme. So the second word cloud should have popped up now on your screens. Just to read that out for everyone. What do you consider the most important aspect in project delivery to achieve a successful tariff interoperability service that enables consumers to allow their devices to be responsive to tariff data? So anything else you want to say on this one, Pete?
Other than it's a very similar question in what makes a successful project around tariff interoperability, but you can see the nuance has changed slightly from here, where the other one was very much about, for me, the core is getting consumers to trust it, otherwise it won't have the uptake. This one's much more about interoperability, so that devices can react to tariff data. So we can see here, clear spec. I would agree with that. It's got to be. I think, to be honest, we need to be prescriptive rather than principled on some of the data aspects. The tariff itself, that's a good one, and tariff requirements. Coverage of all tariffs, interesting.
Yeah. So for those looking at the poll in front of you, you can actually hover over some of the words that are being shared, and you can like those, and then that kind of gives us a bit more of an emphasis on the priority areas. So just to highlight that to you. But it looks like a good level of responses and information coming into these polls for you, Pete, to take away.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. So it doesn't look like there's been any more questions coming in. So I think we will move to the next section, which is Brian. Brian's going to be talking about the draft budget for 25-26. So Brian, over to you.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. I can still see the poll on my screen. Oh, maybe it's just I haven't submitted it. There we go. It's gone. Thank you all for joining today, and good morning. You've heard my colleagues so far set out our strategy and activities for the coming year. They've set out our commitment to deliver and improve the REC services and also deliver some new industry initiatives. Together, this bundle will help industry to perform their operations and protect their regulatory and governance compliance obligations. Our draft 25-26 budget sets out the resources that are required to do this. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. At the start, Sid outlined that we are very cognizant we're spending industry money and ultimately consumer money, and we must do that in an efficient and economical way, and at all times it must deliver value ultimately to industry. For the 25-26 budget, we have acted on industry feedback that we received last year on our budget. We've enhanced transparency within our disclosures. We've included year-on-year comparisons. We have given details about headcount increases, and we've also included a section on the expected current year outturn. On that latter part, what's more important than providing the information, we have acted on the expected underspend for this year, and we have returned money to industry both in October as a reduction of the MWHS specific charges, and also in the January invoice run, we've returned a further 2.5 million as a reduction against the standard REC charges. For the coming year, our draft budget is circa 55 million, and that is a 3.5 increase on the current year. But as my colleagues have outlined at several points during the presentation so far, included within our budget and our forward work plan are a number of projects that are contingent. And within the forward work plan and within the budget section, we identified those various contingent elements. Together, they account for about £9 million worth of cost within our budget. And as has been highlighted so far is, if we don't spend that money, either in whole or in part, any of the underspend, if the projects don't crystallize for whatever reason, we will adjust our charges intra-year and we will return the money to industry. Looking at the budget, there are the key drivers for this increase is we have increased our headcount. We have done that for a variety of reasons. We have enhanced our, sorry, if you can just go back to the main slide still, please. Thank you. We've enhanced our capability in the organization. We have introduced, there are the contingent roles within the contingent projects. And what we've also done is that we have created a number of new roles at a junior level, which are developmental roles to bring new people into the industry. As you will see later, the scope and diversity of our projects has increased, but again, several of these are contingent projects, and if they don't go ahead either in whole or in part, we won't incur the costs. Now, to offset the impact of that, we've also acted on industry feedback from last year, and we have revised and reduced our change investment for the coming year. We have revised and reduced the level of contingency that we have included in the budget for the coming year. And also, as Elizabeth spoke to earlier, we have secured reductions in the REC service charges as a direct result of the work that was done on the CRS project in 2024. Yeah, 2024. I'm just going to pause there for a moment and let people take in some of the information that's published on the slide. I would also add that we have published business cases, and within the budget section there is a link to those business cases, and therefore our 5 key main projects for the coming year. So if we can move on to the next section, please. So the first part of this slide covers the REC services. The REC services are those services which within the RECCO is required to procure and deliver for the benefit of industry. Industry is the ultimate recipient of those services. As Elizabeth spoke about earlier, they include the inquiry services, they include CSS, they include theft services, etc., and code manager services. Those services enable industry to perform operational requirements. The inquiry service is a very good example of that. And they also help industry to protect the regulatory and governance compliance. The RPA service is a good example of that. They account for circa 60% of the total budget costs. And we continually seek value from our service providers. We don't just sign a contract on day one and then come back to it 3 years later. It is continually managed by the REC services operation team. As I said, CRS costs have reduced by circa 3 million as a result of the CRS review in 2024. We identified what we expected as part of that work. We identified our view of what the costs of running that service should be. We shared those with Ofgem and DCC matched those for going committed to deliver those going for the future. And that is going to run for the next number of years. All the other REC services are not materially different to the current year. There's indexation impacts and so on, but nothing major. Looking now to the RECCO operations. RECCO is a limited company and we're also a REC party, and they bring obligations in their own right. These are the resources needed to manage and secure value from our service providers, primarily within the operations team, deliver transformation, primarily within the transformation team, and then also to ensure that RECCO can meet all its corporate, legal, Companies Act, Company House, REC and stakeholder engagement obligations. As I said, the big increase compared to the current year's budget is the headcount, and we've disclosed the headcount figures within the budget, and we've given quite a lot of detail of the drivers for each of the headcount increases. But as I've said, they're to enhance the operations capability to allow us to continually secure further value from the REC services. And specifically, Elizabeth outlined a fairly significant improvement plan that's going to be put in place for CRS for the coming years. Enhanced capability to meet the challenge and obligations due under code reform. RECCO is likely to become a licensee. We've also, as I said, created that developmental pathway for new entrant roles, junior roles coming into the organisation. And again, we have a very rich and diverse portfolio of projects for the coming year, and we've enhanced our transformation capability to do that. All of our other costs, be they audit fees, insurance, etc., staff training, etc., they are not materially different year on year to the current year's budget. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the investment projects, my colleagues have spoken at length from those, and there's a lot of very good information in the forward work plan around those. So I'm not going to go into the detail of any of the individual ones, but broadly they can be split into two categories. They are projects that are required to secure the future of the REC services, be either that the creation of digital services, be that the enhancement and improvement in the inquiry services, are two very good examples of those. The other basket of projects are projects to deliver industry initiatives. MWHS is in there, SSES is in there, consumer consent is in there. As I said, they include circa 9 million of contingent projects, and those people with very good eyesight will see some little legends attached to some of the costs within the table. We explain the contingent component that drives that in the forward work plan and budget. And as highlighted and as Pete said earlier, is if these projects do not crystallise, either in whole or part, any of the underspend or non-spend of project money, we will return intra-year to parties. And I've said we have published those business cases to provide an even greater level of detail to support the project allowance. And you can click through from the forward work plan to those particular business cases. The 5 business cases that we've published is digital services, inquiry services, SSES, consumer consent, and the energy theft service. We haven't published a business case for MWHS because I don't think at this stage of that project there's very much that we could add to that. It's a recognised, understood, very well understood project for industry. If we can move to the next slide, please. The final 2 components is change investment and contingency. Last year, we got feedback that our change investment allowance was a fairly blunt instrument. We included a large amount of money without really a full explanation as to how we came to that. We have responded to that, and we have refined our approach for the coming year. What we have done is we have looked at the spend that we have incurred in this current year. We have looked at the expected spend. We have looked at our investment portfolio. We're investing in the inquiry services. We're investing in digital services. They, in and of themselves, should reduce the level of week-on-week, month-on-month functional change spend on those services while we're carrying out those programs. Consequently, we have reduced the allowance by 25%. We've reduced it from 4 million to 3 million. That brings it very much in alignment with this current year's spend. The change investment allowance, there are very strict rules and governance within RECO as to the utilisation of that. It can only be used to fund functional changes to existing REC services. It is not used to fund staff costs, shortfalls in staff costs. It is not used to fund shortfalls in projects, and it is not used to fund shortfalls in operating costs. We've also included a specific contingency allowance within the budget for the coming year. We do not include contingencies within any of our individual lines, nor do we include change investments within any of our individual lines. The contingency allowance is used to hedge against market instability or to fund new regulatory initiatives. We have reduced it significantly. We've reduced it from the historic level of 2 million down to 1.25 million. That's a 37.5% reduction. The market we operate in has got increasing levels of stability within it, and we have also greater foresight of any likely regulatory changes that are coming down the line for RECO. You've heard my colleagues talk about SSES, Consumer Consent Code Reform. We have greater foresight of those. Consequently, we have a less of a need for a large contingency allowance within our budget. There is, however, one caveat attached to that, and it is to do with the scope of SSES, which Pete spoke about earlier. If the scope of our involvement is expanded by DESNZ, then our assessment is the contingency allowance that we've got in the budget would not be sufficient to cover that additional workload or regulatory obligation placed on it. And we would have to deal with that at the time, either through funding underspends elsewhere or absolute last resort having to change the budget mid-year. The final point I just want to pick up is that we are very close to finalising the CRS underspend values for regulatory year 23-24. So that will be the year ending 31 March 2024. That is likely to be around £2.9 million. So that's the difference between what was paid to DCC in that year versus the cost that they incurred in that year. That money will be returned to RECO in 25-26 as a reduction against the DCC costs. What we have shown in our budget is we've shown the gross costs of the CRS for the coming year, the costs excluding the rebate. And I think that's right and proper that we show the full cost of it rather than a suppressed cost with any rebate from prior years. What it'll mean is whilst our budget will be effectively 55 million, our charges will be set to recover circa 52 million. Because we'll be getting that 3 million back as a rebate again for prior years. So the value, the charge per registered meter point will be lower than is currently disclosed in the draft budget. We didn't include it in this draft budget because it hadn't been finalised at this point, and there was some further discussion had to be agreed. That's as far as I'm going to cover on the draft budget, and now I'm going to hand back to Rachel, who'll talk about next steps and future timescales.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of our speakers, and also for everyone in terms of your interaction with the polls and the questions that are coming in. So just a couple of slides from me in terms of the next steps. I wanted to remind you of the consultation process that we're in. I know some of you joined slightly later, so it was important just to highlight that some key timeframes for you. So in terms of the forward work plan was published to you back on the 15th of January, and in line with the requirements of the REC, it's subject to industry consultation for 15 working days. And therefore, you've got about another week to provide your comments to the forward work plan. There's two ways that you can provide your comments to the forward work plan. On the screen in front of you, you'll see the RECO strategy email address. This year, we've also introduced an online survey, which you can provide your comments to, whichever you find easier. It's also worth highlighting that the consultation period for our draft strategy, which for the first time is a standalone document this year, that is also open until the 5th of February. So you can provide your comments to both consultations and review both consultations at the same time. Following the closure of the forward work plan consultation period, we're going to be producing the final budget. So the REC board will consider any comments received, not just from today, but the consultation period in full before publishing a final budget towards the 21st of February. And again, that's in line with the requirements of the REC. We're going to be holding a dedicated webinar on the 26th of February as well, all around the draft budget. So you'll be hearing from members of the executive team on that day. So we'll walk you through a more detailed deep dive in terms of the draft budget and also answering all of your questions. So if you haven't registered yet for the budget webinar, please do so. We'd love to see as many of you as we can at that session. Just in terms of the final budget, whilst I've got the opportunity, it's important to highlight what happens with the final budget. So we publish the final budget and it's not subject to party consultation, but as outlined within REC section 9, REC parties have the ability to appeal specific line items of the budget directly to Ofgem, and that's within a 10 working day period. Following the closure of the appeal window, we will then publish our final strategy document and our final forward work plan document towards the end of March, ahead of delivering all the commitments and deliverables that we set out in the document and we've talked about today over the next financial year. So just in terms of the timeline, I've gone through the main dates there. I think just the other couple of points just to note on this one. In the next couple of days, we will be sending the post-webinar documents to you all via your email, as well as publishing on the RECO website, the recording, the slide deck, and a summary of any questions and responses. Also worth highlighting, following this consultation period and once we've published our final forward work plan towards the end of March, we're going to be continuing with our reporting initiative that we introduced last year following stakeholder feedback. So I know a number of you will have read our quarterly reports that we've been publishing throughout the year. We're going to be continuing with that. And feedback that we had from stakeholders previously was that they wanted to be kept more up to date in terms of how we're doing in delivering all of our commitments. So we introduced that last year and we are intending to continue with that next year. The feedback that we've had is positive on that, but very much we want to continue evolving those quarterly reports based on your feedback and what you'd like to see from RECO. So if you do have any feedback, please reach out to us, reach out to myself. We'd really love to kind of work with you to further improve those reporting for you. So that is the next steps finalised. If I can ask all speakers to please come back on screen, we're going to hold a final Q&A session. So is everyone coming back up? So this is your ability to ask any final questions from the executive team. So please do type in your questions to the Q&A or use the raise hand functionality within Teams. Just going to have a quick look at the Q&A function. Doesn't look like we've had any questions at the moment, but I know Laura within the Q&A tab has shared a sign-up link to the budget webinar, and she's also shared our strategy document as well for your reading. So I do want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to raise any questions. So please, I'll give you a minute or so to type in any questions. I think I'll just use this opportunity anyway, just to thank everyone for joining us today. We've found it extremely valuable to hear your feedback, and I hope you've all found it really useful. In a moment, Laura's going to be launching our final poll, you'll be pleased to hear, which is to get some feedback around how we've done, how useful you found today. And it's incredibly helpful if you provide any comments on how we could improve, so we can make sure that we tailor our engagements with you based on what you would like to see in the future. I'm also just going to use this opportunity just to remind you that at the onset, Sid talked around our chairman's coming to the end of his 6-year term as REC chair, and therefore we're currently within a voting period for our future chair and also the reappointment of our non-executives. So direct comms went out to REC parties over a week ago, and it was also in the bulletin last week to give you an opportunity to vote on the appointment of our new chair and the reappointment of 3 of our non-executives. So just a reminder that the deadline for the party vote closes at 5 p.m. on Friday. Okay, so it doesn't look like we've had any questions. So I'm going to end today. A massive thank you to everyone for joining us today. And if you could provide any feedback in terms of today and the webinar, we'd really appreciate it. So goodbye from me and the rest of the executive team.